All right. Well, hello, everyone. This is Trip, and today we are going to be having some fun because we have a number of guests. Two, potentially three, if the internet cooperates, because Charlene and I have been trying to troubleshoot the internet demons, um, and we either get her voice or her video, and so she may be joining back. We hope so. Or when the episode comes out, you'll get edited in stuff from Charlene. But either way, we know that Gary Dorian and Aaron Stoffer are right here. And I'm very excited for this conversation because they've done something that I think a lot of progressive Christians have. They've got a problem. You can have a beautiful theological vision for the flourishing of life, justice, and equity for all people. And then you're trying to figure out exactly how you get mainline Protestant churches to do anything about it beyond the liturgy they've been stuck in. And one of the things that Gary's worked on and in his throughout his career, something Aaron and I have talked about, and something Charlene practices, is figuring out in what ways can we as progressive Christians find connections, not just of our theology in the world in the abstract, but our congregations and communities that are looking to transform the material world for our neighbors in the present. And so in this brand new book, they've been it is an edited volume, but it brings together scholars who have a foot in both worlds, both the organizing and community action and the scholarly world, thinking about what does it mean to inherit the Christian tradition and the vision of Jesus in the present. And so the way I want to kick this off, I'm gonna have some questions and and talk to each of them. But then if any of you that are on here live, you're more than welcome to put in questions as well in the chat. Just put question there for me so I know what it is. And some of you already downloaded the book and sent in questions. And a couple of them are on the nerdy side, Gary, so we might even do that later when you're just on the podcast. But first up, I want to ask you a question, Gary, because this book is like a embodiment of that connection between organizing church life and organizing transformation in our world that you've been exploring. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about the origin story of this book and how it's connected to a community of scholars who have feet in both worlds vocationally.
Oh, thanks, Trip. Firstly, just a delight to be on with you again. So far as this book is concerned, yes, for many years, I was out there I spoke in a different church every week across the country. So I met a lot of pastors out there and a lot of organizers just in those same contexts, and folks also teaching some of this material and academics. So it's kind of my three circuits, the churches, and then people involved in organizing, and then the academy. And there are some overlaps between these things, but never enough. But what I experienced over and over for years is, especially in ministry, people talk about just how lonely the work could be. That they're out there and feeling like even if they've got something pretty good going in a congregation or a community organizing context, it just feels like not being seen, and questions about whether they're moving the needle and what good is it doing and the like. And just speaking to that kind of loneliness issue that I've known for years and years, was out there and has haunted me. Just even talking about this with my own now former doctoral students whom I had at Union, who are now out doing this very work. Some of them teaching, some of them in congregations, some of them doing organizing, where that's kind of mix and match. It's just it led to this discussion that especially the three of us, Charlene and Aaron and I, had to say there just should be a place where people like us have got a place where we can reconvene and just see each other again and meet and have conferences and maybe put out literature and maybe even a book and just be kind of a supportive kind of network, firstly just to each other, and then also representing something at the Society of Christian Ethics. Since most of us involved in this conversation are social ethicists, and we have a professional organization, of course, the Society of Christian Ethics. And the thing that originated this field is what we are. That is, people who indeed believe that social ethics need to be involved in the work of solidarity activism. It started in the 1880s with just study the reform movements. And you wouldn't know that it started there by going to a fair amount of what happens at SCE. We got diverted into other things, but the argument was, well, we're the ones still believe in this and do it, so we should be a visible presence at Society of Christian Ethics in a way that we actually aren't anymore. So all these things kind of swirled together and got us involved in building an organization that ended up being called SEED. And this book is one of our first projects. It's a project of Social Ethics Energizing Democracy, a scrappy group of academics and organizers and pastors and folks who've got a foot in at least two or more of these camps to talk about just the work today, the work that we're involved in, and making the church aware that there's a history of this. We have a usable past, and also just being a kind of supportive network to each other, to those doing the work.
Yeah, well, a quick follow-up here. The group within the Society of Christian Ethics, the Social Ethics Energizing Democracy, SEED, which is is a catchy acronym.
Nice, good.
Because there's actually some really cool material from my favorite rabbi about the power of a really small seed at transforming things. But when you think of the history of social ethics, its emergence and stuff you signaled out, can you kind of describe, like, what are the questions that are animating scholars in this field that bring together all the different voices that are in this volume, from like Niebuhrian realists to different liberation streams to Catholic social ethics? Like, when they sit around and get a question, everyone's like, oh, that's a good one, Gary. Like, what are those kinds of questions that the field loves to talk about?
Well, firstly, the field itself just got its bearings by people realizing we don't necessarily know what the issues are. We're sitting in our libraries, we teach whatever, Jeremiah and the like, and maybe it takes 8 weeks to even sort of ask the justice question. What's going on in our time that connects to what we're trying to get students to think about when we teach about Moses and Jeremiah? And the folks who founded our field just said, yeah, we don't know necessarily what the issues are. And yet the reform movements have already identified certain sites of dispossession, of oppression, of hurt, of vulnerability, of being harmed in this society. They've already done that. That's why they are where they are. So why don't we follow that lead? If we had a field that simply studies what the justice movements are doing in their work, and got in them, we're supportive of them, this is material that we could teach in a seminary context or a college context. And you wouldn't have to spend 8 weeks with Moses and Jeremiah before you even sort of get to the question about what's going on in our time that we need to connect with. This would be the field where we could do something like that. So it starts with just that idea of just a kind of empirical study of the reform movements. That's the origin story of the field. Now, of course, it morphs through a zig and zag that you pointed to there, even in the question, Trip. You have 40 years of this field before there is a major break. This social ethics is a social gospel enterprise for 40 years. That's where it came from, and you got quite a range of things of what social gospel is. There are all kinds of theologies within the social gospel, different kinds of politics, and reformist and socialist, and all this stuff that's there. But it is very much a social gospel story until you hit the Niebuhr moment, where Niebuhr turns against the social gospel of his experience. That's the one that he knew in the 1920s, because that's the social gospel that had turned into a kind of middle-class idealism. That's just a kind of churchy idealism that's not really got the connection to labor organizing. It's hard to see the socialism that used to be in it. It's mostly become a kind of churchy pacifist movement of the 1920s. Well, Niebuhr knew all about that, because that's where he was all through the 1920s. So then when he turned against it in the early 1930s, yeah, this was a big deal in social ethics. As he said, I turned to the right theologically, but to the left politically. So the argument was that, the social gospel isn't actually that doing enough for justice. It's just too idealistic and too churchy. And so now we get a major turn. Niebuhr did end up taking so much of the field in this direction. So you got a major thing there that needs to be charted. Although it's still very much, there's no Reinhold Niebuhr without the social gospel. It's just totally reactive, and only reactive to even certain parts of it. It's the idealism and the rationalism and the pacifism. That's what he's against. He's not against the social gospel. He is nobody without the social gospel. Meanwhile, you have the Catholic story that is running right along with this one, and that takes much longer to get rolling in this country. But you got those three variables already into the 1930s. And then, of course, later we've got the liberation theology story as well, which is another kind of challenge to what this field was in its past. So you got three sort of dominant paradigms. There's social gospel, Niebuhrian realism, liberation theology, and then the Catholic story alongside and within these as well. And that's the trajectory that this whole field is in and came from.
Yeah.
There's no field without this story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the things that comes out in the book itself, and in previous conversations I've had with both of you around the rest of your work, is that how the story of the emergence of social ethics and the role it plays in the life of the church here is always been it developed in a context of democracies and the contention of what is a democracy and how does it work? What are the responsibilities of the state to its people, the church to the state, and these kind of conundrums. And one of the threads around that tension of kind of like having a justice-centered faith in a democracy that's multi-religious and multi-ethnic is how you ground your convictions from a particular tradition in for action in a world that is is much more diverse than the language stories that animate your action. And so I wonder, Aaron, because you've spent time kind of reflecting on this and also working on it on the ground, like what are the kind of gifts scholars of the tradition and those invested in understanding democracy can give for clergy, people of faith, and congregations that have like the deep commitments that they want to live out, but don't know what it's like to bring the place from which they are animated into a public square and honor the diversity of people, that they'll end up engaging.
Yeah, Tripp, thanks so much. I mean, and Gary, thanks, for your just leadership here and telling the story of social ethics. I mean, I think so much of what you said here around not knowing the right questions to ask, or not presuming the right questions to ask, but taking an inductive approach is so important in terms of the spirit of the volume, turning toward the struggles and the organizing movements as the place that is and the site of critical rigorous theory. I think that's one of the deep commitments of this book, is that organizing is deeply rigorous work. And so this within itself, it breaks any presupposition that there are, armchair social ethicists, that to do the work of social ethics requires you to do the power building on the ground. And it requires you to ask questions like this that you're asking, Trip, which is, how do we work? What I understand you to be asking something around, like, how do we build deep coalitions that are grounded in political pluralism, right? But also put our foot down someplace that have a central commitment. And this is, I think, one of the tensions that liberal Christianity kind of sets up for itself, which is, we talked about this perhaps the last time that we were on the podcast here, Trip, is just heaven forbid that, mainline liberals get confronted by a capital W word, right? That there is something theological that would move them. And to do that in the season of Advent, when we're supposed to be confronted from elsewhere of an anticipation of a newness that is to come, is a really important question. And I think that for many pastors on the ground, the tools that they're dealing with are not enough. They presume that to talk about political standpoints, or they presume that the idea of bringing their fundamental faith commitments into public life is a partisan matter. And that's not the case at all. There's a solid fundamental difference here between partisanship and politics. We're talking about the work of, at least with the difference here, one of the differences between understanding that is that when you understand politics to be the domain of the contestation and the negotiation of the goods that a community holds in common and the pursuit of those, the church is right at the center of that conversation. The church is a public body, right? Mm-hmm. This is, that's from Augustine onward, right? This res publica idea, the idea of really being at the heart of collective conversations. This is the first point that we have to admit, that we're not talking about really partisanship. I will often say I don't really care about the DNC. I could care less about that. What I'm really concerned is how is it that we're building real relational people power in order to transform the world in the directions of social justice that Gary has so wonderfully defined as the work of social ethicists, right? Mm-hmm. Transforming the structures of social justice of society in the directions of social justice, right? So this is really, really key here is the first point of understanding that the church has something to say. Congregations have something to say around public matters. They are public bodies, and that opens the door for us to plant our foot down and bring our fundamental faith commitments into the public arena. But that does not mean that we're asking everyone within our congregation or everyone in which we're engaging with to sound and look like me. What social ethicists bring to the table is the reality that, as Gary said, we have a usable past. We have deep traditions to draw on, deep radical traditions of social gospelers, of Black social gospelers, of white social gospelers, of a worldwide tradition of those who are building the cooperative commonwealth. Of understanding that democratizing the economy is just as important as bringing political democracy. And that's incredibly important here because then you can look to the past to see figures that you can emulate. And these figures are complicated. They're not perfect. No human is. And so that provides you examples to say, well, we're going to test this out. That's what they did in the past. This is why it's valuable to look at labor organizing in the past. This is why it's valuable to look at, the settlement house movement as Joe Strife does. This is why it's valuable to look at the, rise of social Catholicism as Nicholas Hayes Moda does. This is why it's valuable to look at, Carolyn and Colleen's chapter in this here, to look at the National Welfare Rights Union to see, oh my gosh, these are really solid organizing movements that we need to consider in order to understand our own situation better. That allows us to put our foot down and bring our fundamental faith commitments into public arena and into politics, because it otherwise you just get this liberal mismatch of like, well, everyone's the same. No, that's not it at all. As a matter of fact, I want to know what you believe, and I want to know why you believe it. And then we can begin to organize and to disagree on things, and then we can begin to engage in building a real relationship, to build real power. That's what this is about. Organizing is about building relational power, which is about building the capacity to act with significance. It's different from agency. It's different. I'm not just waving my hands around, and no, I'm about bringing a collective of people together who are clear on the action that they want to take, the decision holders that are at stake here, and the repercussions that are going to follow if things don't follow through. So I think this is part of what happens, is that people assume that we need to build a big tent, which means that we all need to be a purple church or something like that. No, I think what we're really talking about is how do we engage differences productively in order to build the cooperative commonwealth, to build the kingdom of God. And that takes real disagreement, and that takes building real power. That's politics, and it's deeply, deeply Christian work, because we have so many others who have gone, scores of others who have gone before us, who have shown us why it's part of Jesus's work. It's part of Jesus's ethics. So yeah, this is great.
So Charlene has now joined us, and it is Charlene Sinclair's first time doing anything on the podcast. So Aaron, I'd love for you to introduce her, and then Charlene, one of the things that I would love for you to talk about first is just explain organizing to people who have the value commitments, but let's imagine they're already uncomfortable. It sounds like Gary and Aaron are asking them to do something that that is more than their sermon or a Sunday school class. Give us an invitation to understanding organizing for the uninitiated. But Aaron, I want you to introduce Charlene first, so people get to know a bit about her.
Thank you. Charlene Sinclair is a lifelong organizer, scholar, leader in the field, a friend, colleague, fellow student of Gary, mentor to me, even though she may not realize it. It's an honor to be here with her, and really the heart of the relational network of Seed and the book. So drum roll, and Charlene, go for it.
Yeah.
Hey. Thank you all. I'm sorry for the disruption. I don't know. They always say Mercury is in retrograde. I don't know what that means, but let's assume that that's what happened. But it's good to be here with you. And Trip, when you actually said a key word when you asked me to define it, which is invitation. Right. And a bit about this too in his chapters. Organizing is an invitation. It's an invitation to join, lock hands with your comrades, with your neighbors, with folks that you see across the room towards developing a deeper, more self-determined future that is rooted in love and justice. At the end of the day, that is organizing, right? We can talk about so much of the technique and processes, etc., but it's a real counter-revolutionary act within this constant push to isolate, to individuate. It is a movement towards a collective enterprise. So when I come and say, let's organize, I'm inviting you into a deeply faith and political practice of collective movement together towards building a more just society. So we can talk about the ways in which we do that. But at the end of the day, I hope that everybody listening will say, this is not something I'm uncomfortable with. This is something I'm excited about being a part of.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. One of the big kind of takeaways for me, like sitting back after reading it, is the different contributors made a contrast in a number of different ways, but where there's this invitation to true Christian discipleship, but to understand what the invitation of discipleship looks like in our own age, with all the ways systems and the inertia of past habits that don't lead to flourishing and things. That means that discipleship really requires organizing, not just charity and not just mobilizing on the occasional issue, but it requires organizing if we the funny part is Jesus literally was the Christ with a community. And for some reason, the Enlightenment, individualism, and the way kind of Protestants in our current age think about the gospel, we think it's something about an individual saying yes maybe to get to heaven if it's one part of the church, or yes to voting the right way if it's another part of the church, or yes to an identity politics inclusion. But one of the threads that runs through it that is really powerful is that true Christian discipleship means being Christian with each other and our neighbors. And being Christian with your neighbors means you actually have to organize for your collective well-being and the flourishing of all life, not just give to something, vote for something, or occasionally show up at something.
Right. I'm a disciple of, so Jesus is Jesus before Jesus became the Christ. That means that Jesus went and joined me. Come with me. Let's begin to do something amazing together. And that is organizing, right? It is the idea that is not working in our behalf, and that I can make an invitation to you to come and be in crafting something completely different. And I get to come to you where you are. I don't sit in, some pulpit somewhere or some legislature somewhere and say those people. I go where people are. And I say to them, I see you. I see you in this moment. I see what you're attempting to do. I know that you are in struggle, and I'm prepared to be in struggle with you. Let's build a community towards that together. And that is the essence of Jesus, who struggled against an imperial force that actually pushed him to be the Christ. Now imagine if we all understood ourselves to be able to take those footsteps, and to know that whatever we do with each other towards building a different future actually is that heaven, is the thing that makes us transcend, is the thing that actually has us become, a force beyond our earthly material reality. And I think that that's the piece that we need to really push when we're thinking about organizing.
Oh, that's beautiful. My heart is strangely warmed, like Tripp at the end of high school reading Rauschenbusch's Bible study for the BSU back in the day, where I'm like, yes, yes, that's what I want to do. One of the other themes that runs through the book is that an embodied ethics is always grounded in relational power and sacred values. And one of the thing is right, like one of the things about each of those, right, is it power. Oftentimes our fascination or infatuation with power in America is a kind of coercive top-down power, the authoritative power, the authoritarian, the one that gets to be the exception, or the one that sets the rules, or the one that gets to break the law. But a relational power is that in your own contribution to what happens, you're already obligated to your neighbor. Because you're in relation, right? And then the same thing with like values. We all have, there's a lot of value voters, but there's not, like when you add the word sacred in front of it, one of the things that shows up in a couple of the essays is that sacred values are things you hold in common. These are values that when we're just honest with the people in front of us, we realize that the ideological capture of so much of the media, the way topics get framed, are such to set us up in competitive values rather than the basic existence of being human with kids and grandkids and neighbors and friends. Mean that there are shared values, and those things can be given the dignity they demand and be sacred. And that doesn't always come across as Christians when we start talking about ethics, because we show up wanting to seize the power to do it how we want, and we want to enforce our values on others. I'd love, maybe you can start first, Gary, but like I'd love for you to help us understand, maybe from a point or two in history, of what it was like in this context of a democracy, a multi-ethnic, multi-religious democracy, to discover that this gift that we see Jesus enacting in his own time takes a unique shape in our own context, where his vision of relational power and grounding these sacred values becomes a leaven of sorts, or a seed, like a mustard seed, for moving towards justice in the present.
Well, I'll say a couple of things here, but as you know, you just teed up Aaron, because Aaron wrote his dissertation on this very thing.
I know, but see, everyone heard us talk about it for 2 hours, so this is why, now he gets to grade you, Gary.
Yes, and then that became this book. And not only that, but when we got pretty close to the end of this book, I said, you know what? We need to reprise that argument in this book. So that's how it is that we have a closing. Aaron has the first chapter, but he also has the last chapter in this book, because the last chapter really does go right down the lane that you just said. I think I want to say just a couple things here, and then just go to Aaron. And one has to do with something you 2 questions ago, Trip, right along this line. There was a kind of suggestion, the way you kind of laid it out, that the folks who kind of founded this field, well, of course they're kind of riding the crest of a wave, right? Because this is the great age of democracy, and they had stuff sort of going for them that in a way that we don't. We're just assaulted by all of it coming apart, and so it's so much harder for us. And of course, that is mainly true. That is the big story is the truth of that picture. However, we do need to sort of just to say for a moment that if democracy is contested for them, they're the ones who actually said, no, we need to actually build on the values of democracy. In fact, democracy is so important. We need to get the best parts out of this democratic tradition that we've had for the past century in this country, and this liberal tradition that says all individuals have rights that can't be taken from them. And we got to hammer together the best parts of these traditions. And that's what we call progressivism. And it can look like, yeah, well, they've got so much going for them that we don't in this kind of post-Christian, post-Christendom, post so many things society. And yet what they were dealing with and speaking to was the fact this country was far more deeply divided and polarized in the 1870s than it is today. As bad as it feels today, they didn't feel like, oh, we're just riding the crest of a wave. They thought they were up against it. And indeed, you've got questions like, how do we even get the churches to be able to deal with Darwin and Darwinism, and where we're not against it, but we're against social Darwinism, because social Darwinism is taking over the social sciences. That is a hell of a thing to pull off. Just on one side to make the churches deal with evolutionary theory per se, and at the same time say, but we have to be dead set against social Darwinism, because that's a non-starter, because you cannot preach sermons about seeing Jesus in the poor and then teach social Darwinism. And yet that's what sociology was becoming in its time. So yeah, I do have a certain kind of admiration for these progressives of that generation, and not just the socialists too, although obviously they're my favorites, but just the reformer types who built something. And it's hard to give them their due now, because they were so successful that we just kind of take it for granted. And yet, that's what we're fumbling for now, is just how do we pull things together to speak to our time, to get the whole thing going in another direction than the way it's going now, such that we need our kind of answer to our version of what that was. And it wasn't that easy for them. We're good at listing all their shortcomings, and I've filled entire books doing so. But I have a real respect for how indeed they found the sacred and named it and organized. And this is the first time in Christian history, with the half exception of abolitionism. And that's the one thing that they could point to when people said, what are you talking about? Churches have never been involved in organizing or activism or changing society. When has the church ever said that? And they were the ones that said, well, we need to become known for it. Those people like Gladden who want to be involved in labor organizing, and the leaders are saying, no, we know you're pastors. You're not on our side. This is life or death for us. We have to know who's on our side, who's got our backs, and that'll never be you because you're middle class pastors and you got well off people paying your salary. You'll just never. We can't trust you. Well, that hurt their feelings because indeed that's where they want to be. And they built something that, we are sort of in that line, but got to figure out how we do it in our time. All right, that's all. That's enough.
Well, I think we had the problem with social Darwinism first, and then neo-Darwinism, both of which function to collapse difference and close off the imagination for agency in all sorts of ways. It treats oppression as natural rather than the product of our social relations. But I'm not going to get sidetracked. That was my anytime complaints about social Darwinism, neo-Darwinism come up, my inner John Cobb just wants to emphasize that that they're counter to the actual trajectory of life's flourishing relations. But going back to the whole conversation you were saying there, Gary, and Aaron's work, one of the let me see, Andrew, who went and got the book when I posted this and said he wanted to hear Aaron's thoughts on this. And this is, it was in it, you talk about the relational meeting as a religious practice, where practice is like the kind of relational meeting or a listening campaign. They aren't just political tools. They're social practices and have this kind of religious function. And they're actually necessary to tend to the ethical life of a group, where you cultivate stories and they're discerning the movement of justice in it. And so his question was, reading that and thinking about our previous conversation on it, do you think that was is that a frame for understanding like why, say, Mondami's campaign started resonating so much? Because part of it actually began by going to voters who voted for Trump, but starting the conversation with their genuine shared needs in the city, and then giving voice and letting his own campaign be the voices of people we would normally write off from one party, shape it.
Yeah, Trip, I think this is so fascinating. And looking at Mamdani's campaign, I want to hear what Charlene has to say about this too. I think that just part of this is real inductive work of going to the people and listening and resonating with their experience. I mean, he's consistently concerned about New Yorkers. And so I really just appreciate it. I mean, Gary's in New York, as I'm talking about. It's like, you're there, man. So I think that inductive move here is right. I do want to say one thing about just this idea of sacred values and value discourse. I think the danger is that when you begin, now this is where you're going to have to correct me or not, Mr. Process Guy and Gary too, but whether, this notion of misplaced concreteness, right? Whether all of a sudden we have a sense where values become free-floating entities that exist apart from a real concrete world and concrete and people's lives and experiences. When we talk about sacred values, we talk about values that people attribute to things, that we put, and therefore we deem that certain goods, people, and ideals ought to be treated a certain sort of way. And so it's much more about how we feel about things, and therefore the stories that we have and that connect us to each other and to these notions like democracy and freedom and justice and these sorts of things. It's not about whether I care enough about justice in the abstract. It's about the stories that make me care about it in the first place, who taught me to love in a certain sort of way. And that's where you get to the relational meeting, because you're consistently asking questions about, well, who taught you that? Why do you think that way? Give me an example of where you did this, and that those sort of agitational moves. So I do think that, the fact that these practices get to people's stories, that asking people what it is that keeps them up at night, right? To use that kind of offhand way of thinking about what sort of conversations these practices get at, is really, really important. I think that it also cultivates, a certain sort of spirit within a community that is contagious. It's treacherous too. Don't get me wrong. I mean, when I'm seeing, I don't want to talk, but Mamdani's campaign, this is, all of a sudden I'm thinking about, wow, look at all the energy that Obama's campaign had in 2008, and yet how much he let so many of those organizers down. And so this is part of like, whoa, there's a trepidation here, like you've got to carry through on this. And that shows that hope and trust are real in this, like really important aspects to consider here, because it's about building relational power, which is different from those sorts of images of power that you've provided: the tyrant, the the boss, the bully, the tough guy. Those are all one-way versions of power. This is Bernard Loomer's unilateral power here. Again, moving again to a good process thinker here. What's important about this is relational power includes the capacity to change. It's not only about exertion, it's also about reception. So in terms of congregations, it's the brittle congregations that can't change. It's because their relational fabric, in this sort of sense, won't allow, they can't receive the energy that it requires to move and adjust. And so they end up breaking. But at the congregations that are strong, that have strong relational ties, that can absorb the energy that happens, that comes when we lose, because we will lose. Loss is a part of this, and this is an important part for people to understand who are not new to organizing, is that loss is an everyday matter of this, and that's really important for white folk to kind of understand that loss is real in this sort of work, and that then allows us to think about how it is that what we're interested in is we're not just interested in these policies or issue campaigns. We're interested in really building strong, relationally powerful congregations that can that understand the right practices, that cultivate the sort of relational fabric within a certain sort of community, that can receive change and adjust and respond and be in the daily life of politics in this sort of way. And the only way you do that is if you're in touch with people's stories about what they care about and what they're concerned about. Not values in the abstract sense, but what it is that people hold most dear, what it is they're willing to do to protect and fight for those things. And that's where you end the relational meeting most often. Sometimes it's, who else should I talk to? But it's, you care a lot about these things. What are you willing to do? Like, who else are you willing to join me about this? I mean, that's I go back and forth a little bit on that, because I don't want to be so the labor organizing one-on-one is much more, kind of the ask focused. And KB has a lot of good focus on that from her she brings in a lot of Jane McAlevey theory here. But the congregational based one is sort of, let's tie the weaves, or let's weave the ties better of a campaign. So I don't know, Gary and Charlene, I'm curious your thoughts on Mamdani's campaign and his ability to really do organizing throughout this. I'm not there, so this is all suspect.
Yeah, I'm not in New York often either, but when you mention this, I'm going to make a couple of moves that may seem strange, because as soon as you started talking, I thought about Jesus, W.E.B. Du Bois, and Mandami, literally as expressions of the same thing, right? So Du Bois talks about abolition democracy. The idea that in order for democracy to be possible, you actually have to get rid of the systems that oppress people. Hungry people can't be in democratic processes. It was one of the things that Du Bois talked about. And I see that as similar to what Jesus is doing, right? Creating a communal movement of folks that actually see each other. How can you get closer to the I am? Through the process of seeing each other and tending to each other's needs, right? And through that, you are designing a different kind of society. And I think that that's what Mamdani was doing, right? Like literally tending to the needs of the people and saying it is in this tending that we can create a different kind of societal connection with each other. And so I think that that is what is important as we begin to think about organizing, is that we're actually talking about transforming society. You know, it's not a cute thing, it's an actually deeply serious thing, right? And so, and I think all three of them and many organizers, many movements are in this process, right? I mean, you could do King and you see this process. Like successful organizing is about what are you prepared to do to actually dismantle systems of injustice, you know. And as King said, you bring power to that power that is rooted in love, not power that is rooted in coercion or domination or any of that. And I think that that's what was also the appeal with Mamdani in this moment, is like the joy, the sense of possibility, the moving forward towards something, was what folks really wanted and hungered for. And I think that sometimes organizing is seen as a level of coercion in some ways, or manipulation. We're going to talk to these people, figure out what they want, and then we're going to do X, Y, Z. But it really is, in my mind, when I think about like the bomb in Gilead, that's what I think about organizing. Like this process, this sense of community, this way of being that says to people, I've got you. I see you. You are not alone. You know, you are not alone in the things that hurt you. You are not alone in the things that harm you. And together, we can actually strive towards developing a different way of being with each other and society with us. And so I think Mom Donnie is off to a good start. And politics is a tough game. Is so but I do think that it will require all of us, and this comes in the book, and I think Aaron, you said it explicitly. The other thing that organizing does, it helps people make meaning of what they're encountering. And so that is a critical component of the work, is that how do we interpret this together so that we can make a meaning that is one that is future focused, that's crafted in dignity, that is about our thriving. You know, it's the difference between the Lord's Prayer saying that God is saying release folks from debt versus God is saying don't walk on my grass. Like it is literally it's that distinction. So, you know, those are the things that came to mind for me.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's really helpful.
Well, I would say that the movement made Mamdani more than the reverse. Of late, yes, he is a person of just extraordinary political talent. He's in a very small group of folks who are talented in the way that he is, and so he was able to leverage what he was part of for it to become what it has become, and now he's in a position to do an enormous amount of good if certain things can go right. And even some of the things that might not go right have something to do with some of the cracks that have to do with where he came from, because we have issues in this all New York City DSA group and the larger orbit that haven't really been worked through. We have a problem of entryism, of ultra left kind of sects that came in after the first Bernie campaign. Folks who actually are not democratic socialists, and yet here they are in DSA. And so we've got the conflict that, you know, that can come from kind of quite different ideologies within one organization coming together, that are something we just have to work through and have been for some years. But despite all that, I have been saying for 8 years that this group, the core group of Justice Democrats and New York City DSA types and others in that kind of outer ring of that group, is the greatest bunch of organizers I have ever met. And Mamdani is a product of that. I mean, he was Ross Barkan's campaign manager in 2018. He is totally a product of this group that has built a culture of organizing, even with some of the problems underneath that I just waved to for a moment there. Even with some of that's going on, and what's showing here is I am a little worried about what trouble they could make for him, in the next year. I mean, that's just we game that out and worry about it. But he represents just the best of a culture of organizing that has just made an enormous difference in this city, and where people there are folks in it now who were part of Cuomo's team, so they were part of something that was the opposite of what this is. Just in terms of the personal dynamics and how you treat people, how you politicize. So we have folks who ended up in Mamdani's campaign who that's their past, and they're just stunned by the difference about what it feels like to be in an actual democratic culture of organizing, where people look out for each other and got each other's backs and are trying to go forward together, to build something that just wasn't before and wouldn't have been possible on other terms. So yes, we're in a kind of precious moment right now, hoping that the best can come from it, and that also involves cutting him a certain amount of slack. This is something that I am known for in certain circles around here, where I say, once your friends get in, you have to remember they're your friends, I went a long period. I didn't know anybody who got elected. I mean, just the thought that anybody I knew and was hanging out with would get elected to anything was just, it was a joke. That couldn't happen. And then in a later time in my life, I not only know people getting elected to Congress, I have a pretty good friend who's a senator, for goodness sake. And I think, when that happens, when you reach a moment where actually, yes, people from our circle can actually get elected, there is a kind of moral responsibility that comes with being their friend, with realizing what now they are in, that they have to deal with in order to become successful in what it is that we've put them into. And the political left has trouble with this. We have a hard time supporting leaders, always have been, and that's partly for good reasons, because we're the ones who we don't operate on the authoritarian impulse, but got to develop the practices of supporting our friends when they get in.
Yeah. The one of the things, even seeing the connection there from like exploring his campaign to then the larger picture of relational power and sacred values, what came to my mind, because Aaron mentioned the fallacy of misplaced concreteness, is what that actually shows up. How one of the ways that shows up in our self-understanding in whether you're clergy or in the academy or even a leader of any of these groups is like when we have this kind of misplaced concreteness of ourself, what shows up in relationship is the gestured self, where you have this like totality, a kind of closure of self that you're projecting or gesturing at someone, and you're mostly running around to see who will gesture the same way and call them allies, rather than like the encountering self, one whose self becomes a self precisely in relations. Paul Ricoeur talks about that in his Gifford lectures, like the self is one in another. I mean, if we need to start quoting Paul, we could do that as well. But there's this sense that one of the things we do is take ourself and what we bring and our values to the world, and then we have like the idealized closed picture, and then run around throwing it into things to find people that will recapitulate what we get or support what we get, but to actually have the value as something that emerges in relationship, where the otherness of each other contributes to it. That actually is an escalatory type of power, because we come to something together. You can say the many and the one are then increased by one, and now there's a community that's being inherited, and not just I think that was like one of the things that came to mind in Gary, of thinking about like the missed opportunities of the Obama campaign. Is he gestured hope and change, and we liked that he did it, but there wasn't thinking in it of how does the whole community that respond actually help us understand what the hope and change is, and then how does what we have become together become something that has an inertia, without the one good leader as the mouthpiece, whether it's a presidential candidate or my family or church planners. There's the whole paranoia of when you leave the church, does it work? Or think of how many congregations are personality dependent, because they really think they're showing up just for what you do in worship, rather than who we are as a people. And I think that relational power and sacred values are an invitation beyond the kind of gesturing self, to one that's discovered in the encounter. And you see that running throughout it. And there are two articles, or two bits in it that show up precisely for those of us that are in largely church education or theological education. And there are two different warnings. They're similar, but were said differently. And so I want to just read my little summary of the two, and then y'all can decide who wants to articulate what this looks like and how not to do it, because I felt like I was reading a mirror, and then had to go do some confessing. But one of the big takeaways that I had is that, like, education and organizing, whatever way you're engaging in, you have to resist the lure towards like a technocracy and paternalism. So often religious leaders, social ethicists, and these things, we end up replacing a participatory democracy and trusting local knowledge, and then insert our kind of abstract awareness of something. We bring in our managerial expertise and end up performing a kind of enlightened paternalism that sucks all the soul and energy out of it. And there's this thing that shows up in progressive movements where there's a real danger for professionalization. And in the book you hear about, like, the settlement house movement, the East Harlem Protestant parish, all risk becoming professionalized, where you create a distance between trained professionals and the community they serve, and oftentimes that sets up where you have white-led missions that kind of end up taking over and telling everyone what to do. But whether it's in the academy or the church or even in organizing, all these different ways of doing community have kind of sucked the agency out of the collective by creating, some kind of self-selecting energy to put the right figurehead at the top. And when we end up doing it, we cut off the connection between leaders and the whole, and set up with these kind of paternalisms and such. The large complaints about the managerial class and how it's undermined the integrity of all sorts of institutions. But that thread has shown up whether in historical stories in the articles or thinking about its role in the academy and the church and organizing. So I'd love for y'all to take some time to kind of unpack that, and because that was one of the most exciting things reading it. I was like, what does it look like for people with feet in multiple fields to dream of moving beyond that kind of leadership and pedagogy?
Well, I think this is, Gary, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this in regard to Joe's chapter, making ministers or training technocrats. I think this is great. And Charlene, the other example here comes to mind is Beulah Sanders. So I think the difference there, those are two great historical examples of what Tripp is talking about. That's me sort of queuing up the two of you.
Yeah, I thought it was a punt. It's a queue up.
Maybe.
Okay. Yeah, as Tripp was talking, a bunch of things floated through my mind. And so, I'm sitting here as a, Black woman immigrant organizer, right? And so when those gestures are made, looking for someone Israeli for me, and so, which I think is important, right? Because that's a part of the move towards a professionalization, is that we shouldn't assume that because we are talking about organizing and organizing visions and the power of organizing, that it isn't rife with paternalism, patriarchy, and and racism. Like, we should not assume that that is not the case. And I came up in the Saul Alinsky organizing tradition as well. And what happens that is often not captured, and that's why the Beulah Sanders piece is so important. What Carolyn and Colleen is doing is so important, is because the work of Black women are always there. And these organizations, the movements, the field itself would not exist without, unfortunately, the pain, but also the strength, the knowledge, and the power of Black women that refuse to have that pain have the final word. And so I think that it is important to understand that there are always these tensions moving simultaneously. And one of the things that the book is trying to do is to recognize that, even in the professionalization of this, there are tensions. And one of the things that this question is making me think about a bit is that, you know, where are we in doing a book of this kind and in building the seed movement? I call it, I like to think of our work as a movement. How do we actually push back against that to bring forward the voices, the strategies, the knowledge of those that are often there doing the work, framing out the processes, doing the radical thinking, the radical push, but are rarely writing the chapters. And so, how do we make sure that those voices are heard? And I think that this was one attempt towards some of that. And it really is a push for us, I think, to make sure that as we continue to do this work together, to recognize that we don't want to end up as thinking about our work as somehow outside of the struggle against those tensions that would lead to us creating processes that are racist, that are patriarchal, that are paternalistic. In some cases, I'd say even, like white woman maternalistic. And so these are things that you're bringing up for me as real tensions as we begin to start doing this work. But it's similar to the work of the church, right? How I used to organize, I'd be like, God save me from what? Because we tend to already think we understand and we know and we're in solidarity, etc. But the real key to being effective is to constantly self-interrogate. And so I hope that this is some of what people are seeing or feeling or experiencing when they're reading some of these chapters, is a recognition that yes, we are making an intervention and an argument, but it is rooted also in a level of interrogation around all of it. So
Yeah.
Gary, I'm queuing you up.
Wow. Firstly, I have to say something prefatory, just in response to that, which Charlene wrote a dissertation in which she made an argument that all these books about James Cone are not quite right because they don't see the deep role and importance of Frantz Fanon, and especially the masks argument that's in Cone. Now, this, as I say, it's in the dissertation. It's a pretty brave thing to do when you have James Cone himself sitting on your dissertation committee. How is this going to go? He was deeply moved when he read it. He said, "Oh my God, indeed, this has never been written, and yet that's taken me right back to where this all came from, to what I was giving voice to when I wrote Black Theology and Black Power." All right, that's my prefatory run. With regard to the question on the table, yeah, the locus classicus here. It's Vita Scudder versus Jane Addams, and I cheer for Scudder. Of course I do. I wish so much that the Scudder side of the argument, which is that settlements should be Christian ministries, and we should resist this trend, this logic to professionalization. We don't want to just turn it into a profession that's got degreed and a place in the academy and so on, and that'll end up killing it. I'm totally on the Scudder side of this argument, and if you extend it out, yeah, that takes you right straight to Joe's chapter in our book, saying that's the side that should prevail, and yet it almost never does in any version of this that you could talk about, even with regard to the social gospel. This happens. It happens even here, where I teach at Union. You can just trace it out. Where there is a tendency where social justice religion tends to kind of flatten out to become just oriented around the politics, and the spirituality in it underneath it ends up kind of being drained out, and we're kind of theologically relativistic and nice, so we say, oh well, that isn't what matters anyway. What matters is if you're for justice and so on. And so there is a tendency in all manner of examples whereby the ethos that's becomes kind of where it gets kind of managerialized and turned into some kind of a profession does end up prevailing. And I am all for the soul in the social order, and making the case for why it dies without the spirituality, whether it's here at Union or in any kind of religious context. And yet you can hear it coming, right? And yet I cannot say that I have the kind of dismissal or just even looking down on what comes of progressivism with regard to, say, government. I mean, before progressivism, government is just whatever gang gets in and can shake things down and get their cronies in there, shake it down for what it's worth. And we just had the epitome of corruption, and that with the Grant administration just before. That's just what they're reacting to and saying we've got to create work whereby people who are devoted to the common good, to the civic order, who believe in, yes, all these American values, will be stewards of a society regardless of which party gets in the like. There's a kind of an ethic of professionalism that we are going to hold each other to that I do not denigrate. I think it's easy to make fun of. It's easy to we've got this whole rhetoric of abuse for it, which is within certain limits. It's just what you should expect. It's what you need to be able to criticize anything. But my goodness, once you lose it, once you've had government administration that's actually done by people who are looking out for everyone and trying to apply policies fairly, and if you've had that and then you lose it, you've lost something precious. Mm-hmm. So I am a little deconstruction for me always only just is valuable to a certain point, and not beyond it.
So one of the questions that came in was from a clergy member who who asked, was making an observation about their congregation, and it was a long email, but in it, she said that one of the changes really post COVID that became clear to her are the number of people who kind of previously within the life of the church would have experienced their place in society as some stable part of the middle class, and then after that, that's shifted, and that there just seems to be, even in a historic successful, on church terms, not having crisis in it, kind of middle class church, the number of people within the congregation who now feel like they're more in a precarious part of church life, it has grown. And whether it's the growing number of kids that grew up and have less options than expected, like their parents aren't confident that they're getting the fair shake, can't do as well as your parents, or people whose careers, what part of the economy they're working in, of ones where the rewards have decreased over time. But there's just there's like a larger percentage of the members who have family members in a kind of precarious class that before were in a middle class. And she asked, what is a way of both of making space so the congregation, people can voice it? Because oftentimes they don't share when they're in desperate needs, if the congregation is historically safe economically from the shifts that are going on. But also, what does it mean when you're starting to see that show up? What does it mean to take those needs and things and not just allow space for them to vote or voice it, but for the church to organize and meet the needs of more people who in ways that aren't just like, well, they're going to help this one person out or this other person out, but to help the kind of growing collection of people in the new precarious class see how the larger structure has put them there. And she's like, that's one of the places I feel like there's opportunities for organizing in so many of these suburban mainline churches, is the growing precarious class, when they realize that they have more in common with the people across town. They historically have seen better than the people at the top.
Yeah, I mean, Tripp, this is right on. I think you're describing one of the ripples, one of the realities of the shifting ecclesial landscape since 2000 or whenever. Just not only are congregations getting smaller and older, there's been a massive shift in regard to the presupposed place of congregations within society. And so I think one of the realities that COVID forced upon mainline Christianity is, and many, I'm Presbyterian, so I'll talk about this in terms of Presbyterian congregations, is that many of our members are just as vulnerable and a part of the working class as anybody else. And so the shock for them is that forces them out of a charity mindset, which they are so often in, which is helping others. Heaven forbid they actually need help, or that their families are going through the economic insecurity or healthcare crises. I mean, come on, think about one thing goes wrong to a hospital visit and you've got debt collectors on your door 24/7. This is very real for people, and it's scary. And I think part of the invitation that Charlene mentioned here at the start of organizing is welcoming people into the vulnerability of relational power. That's what it is. That's where we'll meet you in your broken place, because you're broken. I mean, and let's be real. Part of this is not just like, it's not that emotional brokenness is only, that's not that only sort of trauma, but it is about deep economic insecurity. It's about not having, being paycheck to paycheck and not being able to pay rent, not being able to pay your mortgage, not being able to pay kids' childcare. I mean, it becomes very real, and then it stacks on top of each other. You can't pay one, then you can't pay the other. And then you overdraft, and then all of a sudden things begin to sort of build. So I think that part of what you're tipping at is the vulnerability is scary, and it opens up onto a real organizational reality of the institution of the church. And I want to use those two terms differently, because organization and institution, because I think it's helpful to distinguish between what an American institution is, like baseball or the sports, these patterns of social activity, as Bella has provided for us, and the Good Society After Habits of the Heart. There's so helpful in thinking through what are the patterns of social activity that define our cultural life, and religion and congregations are one of those, and they get that's part of how we define and who we are as the mainline liberals, right? You go to church, and you go to a nice church, right? Because this is mainly very obviously, well, I don't know, I'd be interested in, I don't know the Black tradition as well, but within white liberal, congregations, you go this, and it's about, Ted Smith essentially tells the story very easily, which is that it used to be you go to MDiv to join a professional class. It's about climbing up the ladder. That's no longer the case. And you don't buy pews anymore. And so joining a congregation is not a signal to a certain class status. And that's a hard reality for folk, because these mainline congregations are just as precarious as everything else. So, all right. So that's part of what you're talking about. And I think it's connected to the de facto mode of people and thinking about mission of the congregation is charity, is helping others. Well, what happens when all of a sudden you need charity? What happens when all of a sudden and your congregation then has to think about you differently? This connects all the way back, Trip, to what you're talking about in terms of congregations that are personality driven. Because if your congregations are not leaderful, if you are not developing a deep bench of leaders who can run your organization well, when that personality leaves, you will not have a strong organization to act effectively in the public in a time when social safety nets are being massively torn apart. All right, so then what can you do if all of a sudden you're a pastor in a congregation and you realize that the vulnerability is deep and the precarity goes on a number of different levels? This is where I do really think that the practice of the listening campaign is a religious political practice. It is a practice that honestly asks congregations to listen to what keeps them up at night. What are they worried about? What are your anxieties? What are your hopes, and what are you willing to do about it? Right? Who's responsible for your precarity? Or at least who's responsible? Who are the decision makers who are impacting the decisions in your local context? It gives people handholds to then, so once you do this process, then you start, okay, we've done this internally. And I say this often in congregations. One thing you could do is, after you've done a listening campaign, you've identified what your issues are, what your values are, take action. Rip out the red carpet in your congregation. Do something that makes you feel like you have agency as an organization, as a collective body that can make a difference over the conditions that govern your own life, right? That's part of being democratic citizens in this way of participating in that. And the listening campaign then inherently, this is real. This is where this is a Gary term here. This is picked up from his reading of Hegel, right? Which is that the spirit moves in a spiral fashion. It moves you inward in deeper relationship to each other and then propels you outward. You cannot just rip out the carpet. You have to then go out and talk to other people. Do an internal action. That's great. But then all of a sudden start thinking about how the conditions are impacted by others. Talk about your community. Do you actually know your neighbors at your congregation, at your building? If you're a commuter church, where are your congregants? I bet there's some neighboring of them throughout your city that you could understand how it is that they live in various places. What are the conditions that are impacting them? What are their school districts? Ask questions. So the listening campaign provides you with a religious political practice to get in touch and welcome people into the relational power that can emerge when you begin to share and honor the vulnerability. And the spirit, capital S spirit, meaning both the sense of your ethical relationships and the Holy Spirit, will draw you deeper and move you out into public. It is more than just us. It is something else that is confronting us. So that's these organizing practices, on a basic political level, like social analysis, rehabilitate institutional practices that we are well familiar with. These practices, patterns of social activity that define who we are culturally as mainline liberals, but they ask us to really carry them to full tilt, to build power, to actually build organizations that make a difference over our life. So I'm sorry, that was a lot, but that's right on, man.
We need religious congregations to be what K.B. Brower in our book says they are, which is one of the two sites in this country that actually believe in sacred value and that hold out against a society that just commodifies everything relentlessly, systematically. Of course, she says, the other side is her work, labor organizing. But yeah, we need them to be what she says they're trying to be.
So one of the other kind of conversations that runs in the book, and maybe it's a good one to let you kind of each respond to, and whatever pops up to wrap things up, is the book is comes from people that are working in different communities, be it organizing, the academy, and church. And different chapters, there's like the clear kind of wisdom that comes from people who are invested in these different communities. And yet most people in any one of the three have their like education and then their vocation invested in one of them. And most of them, the advancement in them are often valuing silos. I'm sure most of us here have been on a committee before, either for a new hire or tenure and stuff. And just think of how many things a social ethicist could do that don't show up on a tenure review committee, or you're interviewing ministers, and then you find out one of them spends half of their time getting to know community and investing in the community, but aren't the people that tithe, or these there's so many kind of ways in which one advances in any of these communities that kind of preserve the siloing effect. But the different people that are contributing this book kind of represent the kind of the possibility and the creativity that comes when we move beyond silos that are not just helping us, focus our energies and stuff, but are actually ending up muting what it is we have to share with each other. And so I'd love for y'all to kind of just you can pick one of either the people that get talked about in the book or contributors, or an experience in your own life to talk about the possibility when we move beyond that kind of the incentive structure of the silos and become, kind of transgress the disciplinary boundaries and the institutional boundaries for our communities. You all have the I'm about to say something face, and Aaron, you can go first.
Yeah, I'll get it done. I assume that we can reiterate and choose same people.
Yeah.
But I do think that Colleen and Carolyn's chapter here, just in their co-authoring of it, I do think what I like about this book is we have 3 editors. In a time in which the Academy does not, or anything does not really reward collaboration, and in which collaboration takes longer. We are committed to moving together, and I like that. And Colleen and Carolyn's chapter again demonstrates their co-authoring of it, they're different locations in terms of where they are professionally, right? Like Carolyn Baker leading the General Baker Institute and Colleen at Earlham School of Religion. It shows us just that the academy and community organizing, professionals can work fruitfully together in ways that are mutually beneficial. So that to me is really important. And that what's important about this too is that sort of collaboration is going to be incredibly important as the institution, as the fields of the church and the academy go through these deep contractions and begin to explore new ventures going forward. Because it's not as if people don't want continued formation, and it's not as if people aren't hungry to remake the world and envision new, more just versions of society. But there's a need for organization and for institutions that can show us how to do that. That sort of collaboration to me is really exemplifies that.
Yeah. Charlene?
Oops.
Oh.
Muted him.
Oh, she's muted. Why don't you go, Gary? Hopefully the internet didn't just turn her mic off again.
Yeah.
Charlene, did you hear? You're muted.
Gary,
Maybe
why don't you go ahead and go? Yeah.
All right. There's a similar sort of note registered with regard to this in the chapters by Cynthia Molobida and Melinda Berry in our book, where there's the kind of backdrop of a kind of organizing that has a history of being sometimes a little too prizing, the confrontational moment, the chastising, the scolding into becoming some other kind of self or the like. And in different ways, these two chapters are kind of speaking for a kind of gentler, kindler, I'd say more loving-spirited type of organizing that comes from, in Melinda's case, being a womanist, just having a deep kind of spiritual commitment to a womanist ethos and spiritual vision, where the argument is that no, we're drawing upon the wisdom of, in this case, a basically Southern Black female culture that emphasizes wholeness and wholeheartedness and caring for the other and looking out for each other, and in a way that is not just trying to correct your arguments or set people straight or the like, and that prizes survival instead of this kind of rather heroic male language of liberation and revolution and the like. So Melinda in her piece is explicates what she calls a luxocratic ethic and spirituality. And one of the things that she loves about womanism, even though she's very much Christian-based herself, teaching at a Mennonite seminary, but the fact that womanism takes you so far beyond just the field of a kind of Christian domesticity, but connects in interfaith conversations and in aspects of the academy that are actually secular. That womanism has been able to get into women's studies programs that aren't religious per se at all. And so there's a kind of argument in this chapter for what the kind of ethos and trajectory of a kind of third wave womanism in Melinda's chapter, and then also Cynthia's chapter here. I mean, this is a very prominent social ethicist in our field, long time, who's been writing done wonderful work for many years, and yet was looking for what's the way to actually teach this in a way that gets beyond where we often get stuck in the academy, where it's just teaching ideas, and it never feels like it gets to something concrete. And which is why Cynthia started teaching a course on organizing. But then this chapter is an account about the kind of trial and error of what that was like, because knows a lot, able to put out a course that looks very well thought through and the like, and wow, now deal with the reaction to it from just ordinary seminary students who just feel, no, this is way too scolding, and I don't want to be an organizer, I want to be a pastor, and this isn't how I want to relate to people, and blah, blah, blah. And having to learn from how it is indeed that seminarians are experiencing being organized, which is also an angle of Melinda's chapter, just not just being the organizer. What is it like to be organized? What's confronting you when it happens to you? So both of these chapters they've got things in common. They might not even kind of think about in those terms, except your question sort of brings it out of me, how indeed they are very much linked in just this way.
All right, Charlene. Oh, the mic's not working again. Look at this is wild.
This is
all right. I missed Paul's question here, but Gary, I'll let you answer it. Then we can wrap up.
Okay.
It was on Facebook, so I didn't see it. But he said he said, could you talk about how the progressive Christian community has had a mixed bag response to the ongoing genocide? U.S. imperialism is a liberal and conservative ideology alike in the U.S. Our Christian brothers and sisters abroad pay the price. How do we build borderless kinship in the name of Christ?
Firstly, I've spoken at a number of conferences in church group contexts where the issue to talk about was Christian nationalism, and I think that's naming something, and there's a trajectory there, and it's a long story in our country. It's not, I mean, my goodness, this is manifest destiny and all that. This is all those ways in which we compel every person who runs for office in this country to be able to tout how it is that we're the greatest country in the world and the greatest ever and so on. We require our politicians to talk this way. So there's a whole series of things with regard to this fraught issue of Christian nationalism that I have seen progressive Christian congregations and denominations and interfaith groups try to get its arms around. And so I've been encouraged, actually, mostly there by that work. Where I have found it, frankly, more difficult is the context in which it's not Christian nationalism, it's religious nationalism. That's the issue, where now it's interfaith isn't just something we get to, it's what's in the room. But now you have to be mindful of just the utter minefield that is out there. In fact, I spoke at a conference a few months ago in DC, where a couple of times the organizers had to get up there and just say, folks, remember, we've got folks here in the room who are right at the edge of what they can say, given the religious community they're representing and the part of the world they're coming from. And we can't even talk about this nationalism issue in a way that's simply the American Christian nationalism problem and issue writ large, because sometimes it is the same thing and sometimes it isn't. I came out of that with my head just spinning, thinking how difficult this work is, but also how necessary. And indeed, we need more practice at it. There just needs to be more of this going on, where we just even build up the body of folks who are involved in this interfaith conversation, that's really we're just starting to build even the network of that do this work. Now here in New York City, we've got this fabulous group called the Interfaith Center that Chloe Breyer is the director of, and who does this work all the time. But of course, that's just New York City, and New York City is kind of made to order for it because we've got the whole world here. My goodness, we have the whole world just in Queens, much less in New York City. So it came naturally to have to do this kind of work. But I think that is spreading, and so all that is fraught about this, because so much of what had been the interfaith work that had gone on for decades, that comes out of National Council of Churches, when it goes in some direction, usually where you've got a fair amount of history behind it, yes, it's Jewish Christian, and there are certain kind of habits of mind and of just practices that just go with having that be the whole fulcrum of what it is. Some of which we now even have to unlearn. Because it's got to be more than just that. I mean, the next stage of ecumenical Christianity has to be, full-bodied and have to deal with many more religious traditions than that. But it's hard. It requires folks even getting a kind of seminary training that basically that is barely beginning. Here at a place like Union, we're just, turning ourselves inside out, trying to figure out how to even keep up with who's in the room right now.
Do you think the interreligious element just within the United States is it creates a host of tensions, and leaders have their whole when they're in a room on behalf of a lot of people, which means you don't always see all the obligations that are connected to it, right? But one of the things in Paul's question that I'd be interested in how you see that historically, in the sense that he points out that there's a kind of consensus, a bipartisan consensus on the American role in foreign policy post-war. And part of it has been the way we relate to Israel as a country, and in the number of clergy who've sent some email going, who are voicing to Tripp the strings of attachment on different issues, or like, I have plenty of my congregants who are like, why can't we say something about what's going on in Palestine? How many videos do we have to see of this? How much money do we have to give here? But then we aren't spending money here for food stamps or for health insurance, but we're going to spend it propping up this. Like when you think of an issue like that, where clergy from every denomination, Southern Baptist clergy and stuff, we have congregants pressing them on it. What would it look like for us to as a church start to raise issues that a lot of those silent strings behind the back of leaders in different places kind of get them to mute or obfuscate? Does that when there's especially that kind of like consensus about what America is to do foreign policy wise, that is in many ways driving leadership, at least the old leadership in both parties?
Firstly, it does start with just even supporting the people who are in the front lines doing the work. That's when we started this seed group. That's what we said. There are, in fact, folks out there doing it, but a lot of them just feel like they're just lonely as hell. And so organizing involves even just noticing, paying attention to those who are out there doing it. I was on a panel a few months, just not that long ago. The guy, his name is Or Zohar is his name. I'd never heard of him before. He founded a group called the Spirit of the Galilee in Galilee, because he's from Israel. And and it's a peacemaking group where they're, it's Israelis and Palestinians being together, working together, just showing that it's possible, saying that we, giving up any kind of claim of supersessionism, supremacism, and the like. What does it mean to just recognize each other's full humanity and deal with each other as, with each other's full validity and legitimacy? And when he was done, I just thought you would have to be brave as hell to carry on that work. I mean, just on a weekly basis. In fact, we had a union here. We had 4 people who visited the West Bank just last month, and who came back, and it was just searing listening to them about what it is that they had experienced there. Just the utter hostility with which they were greeted. What are you doing here? And this is totally, I mean, this is a little peacemaking group, just saying how can we give a witness that shows that we care, that we see, and it was brutal just listening to it. So that's where we are right now, and just even shoring up, giving support to those who indeed brave it is pretty early in the order of business, I think, for groups like us.
Yeah. Well, this has been a lot of fun. Very grateful to you, Aaron and Gary and Charlene, for both editing the book and joining today. The book, again, is Organizing Vision, Social Ethics, and Broad-Based Solidarity, Activism. It's with Orbis Press, which has giving everyone a 30% discount if you use the code TBC when you go get it from their website, which is simultaneously a discount and all the invitation you need to avoid sending Bezos to deliver this book to you. Though, yeah, if you're going to get him to deliver this one, then maybe he'll read it first. I don't know. But this has been a blast. It's always good to talk to you, Gary and Aaron, and it's great to meet you, Charlene. It appears there's a dissertation I should get to read to talk to you one-on-one about when the internet doesn't hate us and wants to keep turning off your mic. And thank you for all of you that joined live and our 2 very eager listeners that read the book and sent a question within a week. You get an A for effort.
That's right. Thank you, Trip. This is awesome. It's always a good time to be with you.